What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Playmakers Corner podcast. I'm your host for today, Simon Villanos, aka Coach V. This is episode 356. At the time I'm recording this intro, it is currently April 30th, 2024, but myself, Kodey, and Gino have recorded previews for each of the teams that we know that will be at Atlanta for the national tournament here next week here, and those teams are Keiser, Baker, Midland, Weber, Warner, Milligan, St. Thomas, Campbellsville, Ottawa, Kansas Wesleyan, Reinhardt, and Thomas. So there you go there. We're going to talk about each and every single team here. Talk about the season, strengths, weaknesses, ceilings, floor for each and every squad. And it should be a good time. I don't know how long this episode will be. It might be one of our shorter ones, but it should be a good one. Tournament starts next week, May 8th on Wednesday. Kodey and Gino will be there live in Atlanta, in Georgia, technically, to cover as much of it as possible. Unfortunately, I am a teacher. On top of that, I'm coaching track, and we have our championships that week. So I'm sorry, I will not be able to see any of our great supporters out there, but feel free to say hello to Gino and or Kodey and message them leading up to this week with any information that you might have that might give us insight when we cover this thing for real. So there you go. But without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into it and start talking about these great teams. All right, let's go ahead and talk about Keiser here. You know, they had an excellent season, the best since their first year ever. They won 14-1 and are the current Sun Conference champions here. Having just slightly deeper into their record, they played 7 top 10 opponents this season here and are the only team in the entire country to be undefeated against top 10 talent. 7-0, in fact, and I think the only other team to play as many top 10 teams as them, I want to say, is Thomas. So this is a battle-hardened group. That is definitely one of their strengths. The experience that they have from this season alone is big time. They have showed up in every big game, and they have found ways to win games against tough opponents here, which you absolutely got to love from these Keiser Seahawks here. On top of that, I mean, we could still talk about experience, but in terms of past seasons, I believe this team, along with Ottawa, I would say, and St. Thomas actually, I'm going to throw them in there, has a number of fourth-year players who have all played in Sun Conference tournaments, but also national tournaments, so that's 4 years, 3 years of national tournaments going into their fourth. Players like Kennedy Foster, Adriana Rodriguez, Marissa Rubino, Jasmine Roden, their quarterback, Emma Wagaman, the running back / rusher, Brianna Hernandez Silva did it for Kansas Wesleyan, and so she has a lot of that experience winning in the national tournament, as well as many third-year players too, like Chloe Griffin, Alessandra Moore, Adriana Cavallati, Reagan Pellegrino, just to name a few, right? And so the experience is definitely there. Sydney Woodman and Samaya Bryant, by the way, as well. So the experience is definitely there. There's not going to be many other teams in the country that, you know, has that kind of experience, and so therefore I would probably say is least prone to be shook by the big lights, the big stage, and all of that great stuff. You know, these players have been there before, and Keiser, I mean, that's a team that went to the national championship their first year, and then I believe had semifinal finishes the last 2 years, and then going into this year, obviously, I think it's fair to say they're the favorites to win it all, and so there you go there. Their experience is definitely their strengths. Now, as far as weaknesses go, they don't really have too many. This defense is strong. This offense is very good. The only thing that might be a weakness, even to say, is if, you know, they commit too many turnovers on offense and aren't as sharp as they can be. You know, this is a team that has so many weapons, from Ashley Clam, Brenna Ramirez, Kennedy Foster, the OG over there, Brianna Hernandez Silva, Adriana Rodriguez, you know, Jasmine Roden herself, she could scramble too. And so I think there's definitely a possibility that this offense, you know, tries to take too many home run shots, if any, on top of, you know, having a coaching staff which is maybe not I wouldn't say inexperienced, but as far as Sam Harris being a head coach in this position, she is inexperienced in this specific scenario here. But she has been here before as an assistant, and so if you could call that a weakness, there you go there. But that might be the only thing there that could potentially be a threat to Keiser not winning the national championship as far as internally goes. Now, their floor, I would say, is the semifinals. I'd be really surprised if they just lost in the semis and that was it. That would be a real shock, to be honest with you. But, anything could happen. Maybe they just pull a matchup that doesn't go their way, like playing Thomas a third time, who has been really close to beating them, and then that could be an issue. So there's their floor. Semis for sure. Their ceiling is national champions, and I think they are the favorites to win it. But any team can be beat when you get this far into the playoffs and the season here. And so they have to go ahead and proceed with caution. And, they just got to take care of business. What it comes down to is whether they can execute to their full potential or not, because I don't think there's a doubt that this is a national championship team. This is a team that has proven themselves the most this season and, seems to be the team of destiny. But until you knock off everyone you need to, anything can happen. And so we'll see what happens, but Keiser is definitely one of the strongest teams, if not the strongest team in this entire tournament. Let's go ahead and talk about Baker here. Hopefully they will be at this tournament, and if they do, it will be their first time ever, as this is a first-year program. And in their first year, they won a pretty good 12-5 on the season here, being about the third or fourth best here in the KCAC, depending how you look at things. Best win they had of this last season was easily against Kansas Wesleyan, where they beat them in Salina, Kansas, 30-28, but would lose to the same squad 32-13 and 30-13 following that, but would pick up a lot of other very quality wins here throughout this season. Also only lost to Midland 18-0 at one point there too, which isn't bad at all. And that might even be a team they could beat now, as this team only got better. And I think that is definitely one of the upsides of this team, one of the strengths of this team, is that they're young, right? But they're well coached by head coach Willie Perez over there, who I think is one of the best coaches in the country right now, at least going off of this last season alone, right? And because of that, this is a squad that has a lot of potential here, and, if they play a team that has not played them before, there's a pretty solid chance that they could beat them. Honestly, they played very well against some of those better teams down the stretch of the season here, especially, in those early matchups, which, is definitely a benefit of the schedule they had. I think their schedule definitely helped them out, warm up and then eventually get them ready to face those teams. But regardless, this is a team with a good amount of talent here. They do run a little bit of a two-quarterback system. Gabriella Zabaleta is more of the pocket passer. Sanaya Waller, you'll see a lot more dual threat type of stuff going on with her. And then they have some weapons there as well. Destiny Martinez, she is basically one of the lone veterans on this team, one of three sophomores who are the oldest group on this squad here, and she's been extremely productive, a great check down option, good linebacker over there, and so she has really helped out the squad. But they also have some very nice weapons here in this freshman class, and Kayla Harrison, Janai Ferdinand, Logan Hearn has made a lot of plays, Jalen Harris, Faith Phillips kind of seems to be the big time contributor for them on both sides of the ball, that is, but she's kind of the one that they'll go to for a big play, or will make a big play happen. And so they got some good talent on both sides of the ball. It's a very good, core to work with for sure. Now, just as much as their youth is their strength, in that some teams haven't played them yet, and they're very hungry to win, I would also say that their youth is a little bit of their weakness as well. There are times where they just don't look consistently good. And I think that's just an experience thing, you know, not being able to play consistently here on this level of football just yet for all these players. But they'll have very high highs and some relatively low lows, to be honest with you. On top of that, they are a first-year program, so they're not as deep as other teams, so you have a lot of players playing both ways. Against teams like KWU, Ottawa, I feel like that really showed later on in the season here. Now, don't get it twisted. I think this is a Baker team that could definitely win, I'm just talking floor, they could win 1 to 2 games, right? But ceiling is maybe 3 to 4 games in the tournament. I'd be surprised if they didn't win any games at all, unless they just pulled a really bad schedule and have to run the gauntlet. But, you know, this is a team that is very athletic. They're young, they're hungry. They have shown that they can knock off some of the top dogs in the country here. And, you know, they're going to go ahead and go into this tournament with that mindset of, you know, we have nothing to lose. And I think that is the recipe for someone who's going to upset somebody in this tournament potentially. And if they don't, you know, hey, it's a good experience for them. It's good for them to get more games under their belts so that this core could continue to get better moving forward and help teach the next group, next recruiting class that'll be coming in next year. And that'll be huge for this Baker team, who already has, you know, surpassed some expectations here so far in their first year as a program.
Hey y'all, it is Kodey Stoffer here. We're continuing these tourney previews here, and I have the Midland Warriors here as one of my teams. We're going to talk about their record heading into the tournament, how their, you know, post-season tournament ended, if that makes sense, as well as the strengths, weaknesses, floor, and ceiling of this squad here. And so, for Midland, they ended the season 10-6 and ended their year with a second-round exit in the KCAC tournament against the Ottawa Braves. And some of the things that helped lead them to the second round of that tournament and this winning record: Angel Ione Kayo here, who has one of the strongest arms in football, was a major part of that here. And some of the most fun receivers in the country here in Livingston and Butler here. They were able to stretch the field in a ton of ways, and Livingston was also a threat on special teams as well as defense to make interceptions here and get huge returns out of it. Very elusive and speedy Livingston is, and then Butler with just sure hands and a knack for finding those deep pockets downfield. As far as other receivers here, Farron, Millsop, and Nunez, who are all solid and proven security blankets for Angel here. And then defensively, Sydney Red, I would say, is the heart of this defense, who makes a ton of flag pulls, a very sure flag puller, very rarely missing. And then you have Livingston, Millsop, and Patterson, who are all making plays in the pass game here. And, you know, forcing turnovers, batting down passes, and coming up with some big stops and some tough matchups as well, being left one-on-one against some of the best athletes when facing off against the likes of a K-Dub or an Ottawa. Now, weaknesses here is that Kayo is a gunslinger here, which is for better when she is letting it rip downfield and getting huge chunks of plays, but it is for worse with the turnovers. Some of these passes are ill-fated, and she can throw them right out of a game. I kind of witnessed it in the KCAC tournament, where it's like back-to-back-to-back drives of turnovers. It's just like, oh, yep, if you throw an interception on 3 straight drives, especially at Nationals, you're probably cooked here. And so she is going to have to make a huge stride here for her decision-making for this team's ceiling here. And then also sometimes outside of Sydney Red, I think I saw a handful of missed flag pulls that were just really concerning in some big games. And so you got to be able to make those flag pulls if you're the rest of this team here and stop players from getting those extra yards, because those will absolutely kill you. And it was another part of the downfall in this Ottawa game, I would say. Now, for the floor and ceiling here, I think that this is pretty close here. You know, as far as floor goes, I'd say a B round, second round exit. I think that they're good enough to break into the A bracket, but I'm not really sure how tiebreakers work in this pool play and how they're going to decide to do that. And I think that they should probably be one of the bye teams, if not a first-round winner in the B bracket. I think that that is the level of team that we're going to be looking at here, and one that I think is going to be really competitive. It depends on how their game against Baker goes, but if they lose to Baker once, I think that they probably bounce back and beat Baker the second time. just knowing how this team kind of adapts and adjusts with their coaching staff. And then ceiling-wise, I know that I said that I think they're good enough to be in the A bracket, but I think that being the B bracket champions is the ceiling of this team. I think it would mean more for this program in their first year under a new coach to be the B bracket champs, and is more likely to be the height than a first-round A exit, which I think is where they would be in the A division. I think that they would probably be a first-round exit. But, I think that having the word champs thrown in there for your ceiling is not necessarily a bad thing, but it depends on whether it's Jekyll or Hyde that ends up throwing touchdowns or interceptions come tournament time. I think will have a lot to do with how this Midland team does, but they have the fireworks on offense. They have some discipline as well as some playmaking on the defensive side of the ball to just kind of force you to be patient. And then their special teams, I think, is a solid unit as well that could be a threat. And so if they can win 2 out of the 3 facets of the game here, they win offense and special teams or defense and special teams or whatever order you do for that, this team could definitely end up walking home with a trophy from Atlanta. So that's my take on Midland here for the national tournament. The Weber International Warriors here. This was a team that I had a ton of fun watching when I got a chance to during the regular season, with some marquee matchups that I witnessed between them and Warner as well as them and Keiser. So let's go ahead and talk about the Warriors here. Let's talk about the dubs, the W's, and how well they've done this season, as well as talking about their strengths, weaknesses, floor, and ceiling. So Weber went 10-7 for their overall record and 9-6 in the NAIA, and then in the Sun Conference tournament, they lost in the second round after beating STU in the opening round in overtime. And so what are some things that made that possible strengths-wise? I just think that this team is very, very well coached. Coach Molesky here has done the most with a ton of inexperience, but one of the anchors of this team that has experience and has done her part is Sam Wilson, the rock of this offense, and has been integral to keeping the ship afloat at quarterback. I know a lot of teams would kill to have Sam Wilson under center for them, as she is able to just get the ball in places for receivers to make plays. And her ability to find Sigmundi and Gonzalez in stride has kept drives alive. That's Caitlin Sigmundi and Sammy Gonzalez. And then first-year player Riley Bolser here has really come into her own as far as just being a big play machine. And Wilson has adapted her game as well to kind of put things on the top shelf and let Bolser make some incredibly athletic catches. And they've continued to kind of establish a chemistry and a rhythm on the offensive side of the ball that I think is still going to be growing through this tournament. Defensively, Jasmine Henry has been able to flip games at the rusher spot and has created some big plays that's led to turnovers or turnover on downs. And then Bolser has been able to make some very athletic plays on the ball and force some great turnovers. Caitlin Sigmundi is a second-team all-conference level safety, and I completely believe in that, as she just does a great job of playing like a robber or taking away an entire half the field in cover 2. And then Sammy Gonzalez is a very sure flag puller for them on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, there's going to be names that I miss, as this is a team sport, but just talking some of the highlights and lowlights. And speaking of the lowlights here, their weaknesses, they're just very inconsistent and a little inexperienced here. Drops on offense here, oh my gosh, they can be so frustrating here. You could kind of tell who is a bit newer to the sport on this roster, and kind of some of the inconsistencies as far as finding the open spot of the field, or that awareness to kind of have, or what level of physicality they might be playing with, or, the drops. And I just think that those are killer, and they are going to be quite the pain in the neck here with trying to win a national championship. And I think defensively that the, discipline and the flag pulling is also a little inconsistent here. And so they really got to lock in order to bring everything home and together. And they just don't finish very strong all the time. They'll get off to very hot starts, but then their lack of depth becomes more and more apparent against some of the heavyweights as the game goes on. And so let's talk about the floor here. This team has the biggest gap between floor and ceiling, in my opinion, just because it depends on which version of Weber shows up that day. The floor for this team is a first-round exit. I think that if they draw the wrong matchup in the first round, they could lose to a Midland. They could potentially even lose to a first-year program in Baker. Do I think that those teams are better than Weber? I don't necessarily think so. Talent-wise, maybe Midland. Talent-wise, I don't really think so with Baker. But, if they're turning over the ball on offense for Weber, if they're dropping passes, if they're blowing coverages with some of these more inexperienced players, yeah, that's going to be wraps early in the tournament here. But the ceiling here is that they win both of their inner pool games. They beat Warner here, which would, I think is a very close matchup. I think that that's going to be one of the best games of day one. And they end up in the A bracket, and then they beat one of those A bracket teams in the first round. I think that on the right day, this Weber team could be a Kansas Wesleyan. I think that this Weber team could beat a, if somehow Warner ends up in there again, they could beat a Warner in the first round. I just think that pending the matchup, they could beat an STU as they did in the first round of the Sun Conference here. And I think that at their very best, they could beat one of the top dogs in a one-off situation. However, there is a chance that, in that second round, they are just simply outgunned and outdepthed and outclassed here, by an Ottawa Thomas or Keiser here. And, I think that they are one of the kind of dark horse upset alerts. I would definitely not be surprised if they pull off a major upset and just spoil somebody's entire tournament. But I think that they just eventually run out of gas, and that's not going to be enough for them to lift the big old trophy. But Weber here, all things considered, I think that they've retooled very, very well from last season. And for them to be in this position that they are, I think is a major deal and a huge, huge, huge ode to, the returners here from last year, as well as to Coach Molesky and Sam Wilson, who've kind of been the face of this program the past few years and will continue to be the face through this national tournament. All right, and now we have the Royals out of Warner University here. Let's go ahead and talk about their record, strengths, weaknesses, floor, and ceiling heading into this tournament. Now, their record, they went 14-2 overall and 12-2 in NAIA play, and their final regular season game, or postseason, depending on how you chop it up, was a loss in the semis in the Sun Conference tournament after earning a bye through their efforts in the regular season. So in the regular season prior to the Sun Conference tournament, they had only lost to Keiser, and then their second loss came against Thomas in the semis. So let's talk about some of their strengths. Once again, defense here. They pitched 9 shutouts this season. Out of the secondary, Madison Portwood and Anna Vincenzini were both making huge plays, not only being able to force turnovers, but be able to make some big plays off of those turnovers, whether that was taking it to the house or returning it into opponent territory. And then Talisha Perry was lights out as a rusher. And then Lauren Clark has been awesome at linebacker. They've gotten contributions from literally everybody on the defensive side of the ball, though, as far as turnovers go, as far as sacks go, and especially as far as pitching shutouts go. That is a team effort. And this defense, when it is clicking, is capable of being the offense. Because there was a time where against Weber, they scored outside of the extra point attempts, they scored both touchdowns against Weber in a 2-point win. So that is something that's just kind of nuts, honestly. It's kind of like the Denver Broncos of 2015, and you'll understand why a little bit more here as I keep going. But then at the skill position, Vincenzini on the offensive side of the ball is an absolute monster. And then Kayla Ludwig, Jessica Finley, those players have also been shown to be able to make some plays after the catch, which is very, very important for this offense because talking about their weaknesses here, the biggest weakness and the most glaring weakness on this team is quarterback. Whether it's been Crooks, Hutchinson, or Rodriguez, all of those quarterbacks have failed to rise and deliver consistently against top teams on offense. And there's been a handful of instances where the offense has scored very few against top teams. And like I mentioned in their game against Weber, while the defense did score 12 points, there were 0 offensive touchdowns. And that is a major concern heading into a national tournament. I know that defense wins you championships, but the offense has to help get you there at some point. And I just don't know with inconsistent QB play if that's going to be something that's in play for the Royals. And so let's go ahead and talk about their floor. I think that in the absolute worst case scenario here, they have an exit in the B bracket, but in the semis. And hear me out. I think that if they lose in their pool play a game to Weber, that might cost them a berth in the A bracket and then potentially get upset with a lack of offense. But I still think that this team should, if they end up in the B bracket, they should win it. I don't think that there's really a team that strikes me as more consistently getting play here, because like Midland is a team that, as I'll allude to later, has turnovers and whatnot. And so for this team, if they end up in the B bracket because of a loss to Weber in pool play, they should probably win it, but at worst, they probably just lose in the semis or in the chip of the B bracket. Now, ceiling-wise, I think that this team, if they get a win over Weber in their pool play and take care of business against Milligan, which I think they should do, their ceiling is a semis exit in the A bracket. Say they have to play a first-round game, I think that there's a chance that they win that, pending the matchup. But I just don't really see a path to victory over other top 4 teams in the country with the offense that they have. I think that the matchup against Ottawa was very glaring. I think that the matchup against Keiser was very glaring. And I'm not sure if a matchup against Ottawa with their level of explosiveness is going to hold up with the offense being so inconsistent. And defensively, if they match up against Ottawa too, I just think that there's enough players on Ottawa's defense that can turn turnovers into touchdowns, such as their very own Cynthia Holmes, who's over there now. I just think that that is trouble waiting to happen. So the Warner Royals, at worst, actually I'm going to say at worst, they lose in the B bracket championship. I think that they should make the B bracket championship regardless if they end up in that bracket. And then at best, a semis exit in the A bracket. That's my 2 cents on the Warner Royals, who, have been pretty dominant so far this season, but I'm just a little questionable about how they face off against the top-end talent heading into the postseason tournament.
All right, now let's talk about Milligan next here. I'm just going to throw this out there. So their website is a current mess. So I had to go on their Instagram and count how many wins and losses they had. I believe they went 5-8 on the season, which isn't bad. This isn't their first season, but it might as well be their first season as a program. It's the first one under head coach Whitten over there, as they did take a break last season and then came back with a full roster. And so that's a pretty solid spot to be in. They had a couple wins here over Point, over Life, which was an absolute thriller and showed their potential, I believe, just to name a few there. They also finally beat Campbellsville and blew them out just about a week or two ago, and that was a team they've been consistently losing by 1 score to, which is extremely frustrating. But they played some tough teams as well, including some contenders like Warner, St. Thomas, Keiser. They had a pretty rough schedule. They played some pretty tough teams here, and I think that's for the best. Playing some of those tough teams, moving on from there, figuring some things out. And so with that being said, let's talk about the strengths of this team. This is a young team, and for a young team, they do have a pretty solid roster, a good group here, good core to work with. Let me go ahead and start calling out certain players here. I really like Bridget Keiser at quarterback. I think she has a lot of potential here. Now, I haven't been able to watch her play too much just because of, streams and whatnot. But from what I've seen all season, she's been inconsistent. At times, there are times she plays really well, and then times it is not as good as she could be. So there you go there. But I think she's a quarterback that could take a step forward going into next season. Now, in addition, just some other players I want to mention. They have a good amount of athletes here. Ashton Weirley is a freshman wide receiver safety. She is arguably one of their best that they have over there, probably their best athlete that they have over there Abilene LaPrice, she's another freshman wide receiver safety, both from Georgia, by the way, which you gotta absolutely love there. But both of those players have been big time for this team, who, has really worked the ball to them, and defensively they've both stepped up and done a great job all season long. Other players to look out for: Caitlin Quinn has made some nice plays, Bethany Stevens, Sophia Ortiz, Sam Urso, their check down option, she's been real reliable, Michaela Davis, as well as Sarah Rancorn, Jazz Wiggleton, Sakai Newell. They got a lot of young players who are really good athletes, I think, and I think on paper they match up really well with a lot of teams here, but they're young. And technically they do have a first-year head coach. This is his first time coaching, NAIA flag football this last season, that is. And so with that being said, there are going to be some growing pains here. I think this is a team that had a very up and down season, but, playing tough contenders, that's not exactly the greatest recipe for success. I think that could definitely affect confidence here and there, but I think when this team is playing confident, they're a pretty dangerous team as far as first-year programs go. Now, weakness-wise, I think it's exactly that. It's that youth. It's that inconsistency. That's a big issue for them. I think, they definitely play down to some opponents, I would say. And that's an issue. I think that's an issue for sure. The games they played against Campbellsville, that's a good program over there. I like Kidwell and everything they have. Presley paying all those athletes over there. But on paper, I feel like Milligan is way better than them. They have a quarterback, which is huge. And then they have just as many big-time athletes who I believe are also a little bit taller as well, which is never a bad thing. And so this is going to be a very interesting group. We really hope to see them at the national tournament, because I think their floor for sure is at least a game or two. They should be able to win a game or two. If they don't, I think that's a little disappointing. But this is definitely a team that could do it. And then ceiling, maybe 3 or 4 games. If everything's going right, I could see them winning 4 games in the tournament, which I think is a lot. That's the most out of any team that I've predicted so far here. It is a young program, a first-year program, and I think part of that is because of the depth they have as well as the talent they have over there. So we'll just have to see what these Milligan Buffaloes do. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about St. Thomas here, 12-5. On the regular season, played a pretty solid amount of top 10 teams here, 7, which is up there with the most top 10 teams played out of any team in the country, along with Thomas and Keiser. I want to say here they played 7, but against top 10 opponents, they are 3-4 here, losing to the likes of Warner. They would also lose to Keiser, Thomas, and Weber. They would lose to them in the Sun Conference tournament, which was a big surprise and one of the upsets of not only the week but the entire season. So there you go there. That is St. Thomas. Let's go ahead and talk about their strengths real quick here. I think their strength is obvious. It's their defense. Plenty of fantastic players over there. Lanai Leone, she's one. She's been hurt though, or just not available, and so I'm just going to assume she'll be available for the national tournament. But if she's not ready to go, this defense there might be some issues here, so we'll just have to see there. But other than her, they have plenty of other great options just all over this defense. Many Sun Conference, like all conference players, all PMC type players as well here who have won in the past outside of Lanai Leone, like Riona Baker, Deshumba Washington, Maria Vega. Tyler Bryant has had an excellent season. Cameron Campbell, she's a sophomore. She's played extremely well. Mayeli Gayon, the senior, has played really good football. Kaylee Miller over there as well. Quincy Jones has really come on lately here as one of the seniors for this squad, which, by the way, this is a team that has a pretty solid amount of seniors here, like Carissa Dolce, Quincy Jones, who I just mentioned there. Holly Neer is a senior. Kamika Claxite, I want to say, is a senior as well. Mayeli Cayon is a senior. Kayla Alvarez is a senior, who's, by the way, been having a great year. Tyler Bryant, Maria Vega, Jada Graham are all seniors there. And then a whole bunch of other juniors in this class, too. So this is also a very experienced team. But defense, I feel like, is their calling card. That is where they're the most strongest. That's what has won them so many of these big games. One they've won against top 10 opponents there, their defense, just being disruptive and big time there. And so you gotta love that, along with all the experience across the board. One of the most experienced squads out here, along with the likes of Keiser, Thomas. You could probably throw in Midland there as well. So there you go there. Now, as far as weaknesses go, I think this is pretty glaring here, but it's the consistency of the offense. Now, this is an offense that has the ability to go crazy and score like 20 second half points like they did against Weber, in that Sun Conference postseason game. But, this is also an offense that could score one touchdown against Weber in that first half of that game and just really struggle to get anything going. We've had a lot of concerns about this offense as, in all the losses that they've had this season against, top opponents, in all of them but one, they've been able to score more than 3 touchdowns. And that one game was against Weber where they scored 27 and still lost. But, you have games against Thomas where they only scored 6. Keiser only 13. You could even throw in Florida Gateway. They only scored 7 against them. Against Warner at the beginning of the season, they didn't score anything. That's pretty concerning. And it's not like this offense has no talent at all. They have very talented playmakers like Jada Graham, Rihanna Baker. Tashumba Washington has been getting more involved as well. She's been big time. Kaylee Miller, Leah Cruz has been huge for them as a freshman, and she's been electric. But there are just times this offense does not show up and consistently do well. And so that's definitely a weakness. And so for that, their floor is probably the quarters. This is definitely a team that could get knocked out in the quarters. I wouldn't say the semis is necessarily their floor, because I could see them getting eliminated before that if their offense just isn't able to click and has a bad tournament. But if they are, their ceiling, I think, are national champions. They could win the national championship if they are clicking. They are still in that contender tier here. But this offense has been real hot and cold. And so if anything's going to hold them back, that's them. But don't get it twisted. This defense will hold them into a lot of games and will make this tournament interesting. So we'll just have to see what happens.
All right. Now we're going to talk about the Tigers. Go Tigers, but we're not talking about LSU. We're talking about Campbellsville here for flag football heading into nationals. And so let's go ahead and talk about Campbellsville here. Their record, strengths, weaknesses, floor, and ceiling heading into this tournament. So I think that at best, or scratch that, I know for a fact that this team went 8-8, but that includes some JUCO matchups. So maybe even 6-6, I want to say, is what happens, or 7-7, minus those non-NAIA contests. But there were quite a few unfilled scores, and I'm not sure if that was due to them not being played or just them not recorded. But let's go ahead and talk about this team and some things that they do well. I think that when you think of Campbellsville, you got to think of this run game. You got to think of some of the athletes that they've had make plays for this team. I think of Presley Payne and the speed that she has. I think of JC Harper and some of the plays that they've been able to make out of the backfield this past season as well as last season. A little bit of consistency as far as those names and the speed and what they're able to do, right? And, I think that also in addition to that, they have some decent pass catchers and some nice height between the Beecher twins here. There's a 5'10" and a 6 foot listed heights of those twins here, respectively. And, not only are those nice on jump balls for getting big gains, especially in the middle of the field, honestly, where sometimes the defenders are just too little, but it's also good for forcing turnovers on the defensive end, whether that's batting passes up into the air to be intercepted or whether that's making the picks themselves, as well as some solid flag pulls. Unfortunately, beyond this top-end talent here, I think that they are just lacking the experience in a lot of ways. Now, they do have, like I said, plenty of returners from last year, but I still think that talent-wise, they're just not quite in the same tier as a Thomas, as a Warner, as a handful of the Sun Conference teams, and then the top end of the KCAC as well. I just don't think that they have that deep of a bag either. When it comes to their pass game, it's really inconsistent, and it's not really taking the next step. Now, it's still capable of making big plays, some splash plays, but they kind of look like desperation attempts from time to time. And in the national tournament, that's how you're going to end up with turnovers and end up stumbling over yourself. And so the floor and the ceiling, this is one of the closest gaps, I think, of any teams that I'm going to be assessing here. Because for the Tigers, I think that their floor is a B bracket first round exit, depending on their first round matchup. Because let's say that they draw a Baker or a Midland. I think that those teams should probably be favored to beat Campbellsville. Now, Campbellsville has played some good teams very close because their defense is so fast and their flag pulling is so sure. So with that in mind, I do think that on the high end of things, I think that they could make it past the first round and into the second round. But unfortunately, I just think that that is their ceiling. Because, if they do beat one of those teams or they beat a Milligan in the opening round, I just don't really see them really garnering enough momentum and staying hot long enough to win those two games in a row. Because both of those games are going to be played on the same day in the B bracket. And, should that happen, I just don't think that they're going to win a game in their pool play, for one. And then that's going to put them against some of the upper echelon of the B tier or lower echelon of the A tier, whether that's a Weber or Warner or a Midland or a Baker. I think that those teams all, are talent-wise just a bit more talented, and I think that that is going to show come tournament time. So Campbellsville, I think that this is a B bracket team, and at worst a first round exit, but at best a second round exit here. Kind of a small gap from floor to ceiling, but I think that's just where Campbellsville is as a program heading into this 2024 national tournament. Obviously wishing all teams best of luck and looking forward to seeing some big plays while we're down there.
What's going on, y'all? This is Gino with the Playmakers Corner podcast, and today we got some NAIA Women's Flag Football Finals previews. I've got a group of 5 squads that I'm going to be looking at today. We've got some strengths, some weaknesses, and then we'll also go over what I think the floor and ceiling for each of these 5 teams is ahead of the national finals. These 5 teams in order will be the Ottawa Braves, the Kansas Wesleyan Coyotes, the Life Running Eagles, the Reinhardt Eagles, and then coming in last but not least, we got the Southwestern Mound Builders. With that all being said, let's go ahead and start off with our first team in this tournament preview, the Ottawa Braves. Ottawa went 13-4 in the regular season in NAIA games. They are the KCAC regular season and postseason champs for the 4th time in a row, and now they are also looking for their 4th consecutive national title. The strengths, I would say, for this Ottawa Braves team, they have an elite offense with Madison Carrera and a ridiculous receiving core of Cynthia Holmes, Alyssa Linkus, Jaslyn Camacho, Mandolin Scalisi, and Marley Spielberg. You also have Addison Orsborn, who's one of the top utility players in the nation. She is an elite blocker with great instincts, and then she is also an absolute menace with the ball in her hands on top of that. She completes this stacked Ottawa offense. Another strength for this Brave squad, you got an elite defense with DJ Paris and Sue Kaufman as the rushing duo, who might just be the top rushing duo in the nation. Those two are also extremely good when they drop back into coverage. They are both very athletic with awesome instincts. You also have Abby Brown and Cynthia Holmes, who make it very hard to get any sort of big plays against this Brave squad. Another strength for this team, the coaching and just overall championship culture. Liz and Katie Sowers have both coached 3 straight national championship teams here with Ottawa. You can definitely trust them to be ready with a winning game plan ahead of the national tournament. They have made a ton of adjustments since the Reinhardt Invitational and their loss earlier in the season against Kansas Wesleyan. The Braves are more ready than they've ever been for the national tournament. Now, as far as weaknesses go, there aren't many, but one I would say is that they went 0-3 against Sun Conference opponents this season. The Braves were experimenting a bit personnel-wise in the Reinhardt Invitational, but that still doesn't mean that losing 3 straight games to Sun Conference opponents isn't significant. Those 3 losses show that anyone can win the tournament this year, especially with how lethal some of these Sun Conference defenses are this season. Now for the ceiling for this squad, it's pretty simple. National champs for the 4th year in a row is their ceiling. This team is stacked top to bottom with talent, with arguably the best coaching staff in all of NAIA. They are an easy contender to repeat as national champions, and I think everyone paying attention is well aware of that fact. Now for their floor, I could actually see them somehow missing out on the championship game for the first time in program history. It is not out of the question that Ottawa could get taken out by a team like Keiser or Thomas before the national championship game. There's a ton of talent out there this year, and you already know teams are going to give Ottawa their absolute best effort and game plan. I expect them to at least see the semifinals, but what happens after that is pretty much up in the air at this point. Now for our next team we're going to be taking a look at, we got the Kansas Wesleyan Coyotes of the KCAC. The Coyotes went 14-3 in NAIA games this regular season, and then they were the KCAC runner-up as well. The biggest strength, I would say, for this Coyote squad is the sophomore QB Chihiro Awada. Having seen Awada play many times this season, I can confidently say that she is one of the cleanest QBs in all of NAIA. The transfer from Japan has mechanics that every flag QB dreams of, and her throwing motion is smooth like butter. She gives the Coyotes a chance to win any game they're in just off her ability to make plays alone. She's also very athletic and can use her legs whenever necessary to evade pressure or to just keep it for a nice gain. Another strength for this Kansas Wesleyan squad, I would say, is the secondary and pass defense. Alexa Manser and Angel Roman anchor an elite passing defense that has been a massive reason why the Coyotes were nearly KCAC champs this season. You also have Ans Diane Rabano, who is a very good rusher, and then Jada Wilson and Ashley Hawthorne are extremely reliable defensive backs as well. Now looking at the weaknesses for this team, the number one weakness I would say is the dropped passes. Drops have been absolutely plaguing this offense all season, and it is easily their biggest weakness ahead of the national tournament. They have some very athletic receivers that get open with ease, but it seems like every game they play, there are just so many drops that make games closer than they should be. We saw this in full effect against Ottawa in the KCAC Tournament Championship, where drive after drive was getting shut down by drops, and then the Coyotes got buried because of it. Another weakness, I would say, is just an overall lack of games scheduled against Sun Conference opponents. And now there could be a totally valid reason for that, but I just can't help but notice how the Coyotes didn't play a single Sun Conference opponent this season. That worries me ahead of the national tournament because they could be pretty unprepared against those fast and athletic Florida and Georgia teams who have seen everything this season. The ceiling, I would say, for this Kansas Wesleyan squad is a national tournament semifinals appearance. I think with Chihiro Awada at QB, the Coyotes could do some serious damage in the national tourney. It really just comes down to drops at the end of the day and if they are prepared for these Sun Conference opponents. I don't quite see them as a title contender just yet, but they are truly one or two key pieces away from that kind of hype. The floor for this team would be an early exit from the tournament. I could unfortunately definitely see Kansas Wesleyan getting an unfavorable matchup early on in the tournament, say a team like St. Thomas or Weber, and getting booted early on. I'm not saying it's going to happen because the Coyotes have a ton of talent on that roster to be able to compete, but an early exit is for sure a possibility. The second to last team we're going to be previewing here, we got the Reinhardt Eagles of the Sun Conference. The Eagles went 3-8 in NAIA games, 2-6 in Sun Conference games, and this is a third-year program. Some strengths of this Reinhardt Eagles squad. The first one being that they have a very promising young core. There are plenty of freshmen and sophomore players on this team that are very good. Players like Deshae Branham, Janae Thomas, Jada Vick, and Anaya Moore are all players that I can see making Reinhardt a serious threat in the future. Another strength is that they have a pass-heavy offense. The Eagles are not afraid to throw it, and I consider that a strength for sure. Alicia Wyatt has proven that she can sling the rock, and you combine that with a solid group of receivers and a nice running back, and they are definitely not an easy opponent to face, despite what their record may say. Now moving into the weaknesses, the first one I got is that their red zone offense has been a bit of an issue this year. The Eagles have struggled mightily when it comes to getting the ball in the end zone. They don't have any trouble getting across midfield, but they are a big question mark when they get inside 40 yards or less. If you look at some of their scores this season, you will definitely see what I am talking about. Another weakness I would say is the secondary. The fact of the matter is that teams have no problem getting big plays against this Reinhardt defense. The more established teams especially have had no trouble at all getting past Reinhardt, which may sound obvious, but it still remains true. The ceiling for this Eagles team, I would say, is similar to life. Their ceiling is a win or two in the national tournament. It is not out of the question that Reinhardt gets a win in the tournament depending on their matchups. Is it unlikely at this point? Yes, but it is a ceiling we're talking about, so just remember that. The floor for this Eagles team, I would say, is an early exit from the tournament. Just like life, I think an early exit from the tournament is the likely scenario for the Reinhardt Eagles. I hope they can prove me wrong because they are a fun team to watch, and I really mean that, but this is where we are at right now. I love what they have for the future, though, and I for sure look forward to seeing them play in Atlanta.
Hey y'all, it is Kodey Stoffer here with the Playmakers Corner podcast, and I have some of my own teams to preview here and talk about heading into the NAIA Nationals tournament here, and this one is going to be Thomas University here, the Nighthawks. And so real quickly, if you can't tell from the other fellas, it's going to be record, strengths, weaknesses, floor, and ceiling heading into the tournament here. And so their record heading into the tournament is 15-3, 12-3 in NAIA play, and this team was actually the runner-up of the Sun Conference tournament here. So they got the second seed out of that Sun Conference, and let's go ahead and take a look at their strengths here. And the big one, and the same one that it kind of always has been, is defense, defense, defense here. That is the brand of flag football that this team plays, is that they are just not going to let you really gain anything on this squad that has a great rusher in Caitlin Herb, who's had a fantastic and very impactful freshman season, not only replacing the rushing impact that they had last year, but maybe even improving it just as a freshman. Speaking of freshman standouts, Maddie Hoagland here, or Hoffland, apologies on the pronunciation, but Maddie here at defensive back has been absolutely baller with a ton of pass breakups and, being targeted in one-on-one coverage because of the fact that she is an underclassman has not deterred her from making plays, getting deflections, interceptions, and what have you. Absolutely not a liability on this defense. And then speaking of big play turnover machine here is Giselle Jones, who has a ton of interceptions, and I believe you will hear from me again on a segment in regards to position by position awards. So Giselle Jones, also a stud. And then Janae Scott has been, kind of the gold standard of linebacker in the Sun Conference the past few years with her ability to, minimize gains in the flats from sideline to sideline while also being able to rush the quarterback and get some major sacks here. So, defensively, just an absolute slugfest to get past. And then there's the famous Cole and Scott lineup and formation to kind of close games and possess the ball very well, with Kiana Cole and Janae Scott running an option kind of setup. And then Alexa Wilson has had an amazing season, in huge part thanks to Nakara Brown, who has established a great connection and chemistry with Alexa. Now, weaknesses, I would say that their offense is a little inconsistent. I'd say that outside of Nakara Brown, there's not a reliable big play threat. I mean, you have like Aaliyah Woods, who, does a great job of getting open, runs some pretty shifty routes, and makes some great catches as far as with a hands team goes. She's got some of the best hands in the country, but I just think that as far as big plays and creating downfield separation and getting open on deep bombs, whether Wilson isn't seeing them as often against tougher opponents or whether it's just not there is yet to be clear. And, I'd say something else about Thomas is that they used to have the best linebacker duo in the country, and I don't know if that's really the case anymore, leaving parts of the middle of the field or maybe the flats open against superior opponents. Now, as far as floor goes, this team has got to be in the A bracket, and I think that they should probably still win a game in the A bracket. So I'd say that the floor for this team is like a second-round exit. That's how good this team is in the A bracket. That's the quality of team that we're talking about here. And then the ceiling is that they are national champs, whether that's with a revenge win over Keiser in a third game that they will have played this season, or whether that's a revenge win over Ottawa should they get a chance to face them in the national championship for the third year in a row. I just think that something's got to give if they get these teams again in a big pressure game. I mean, they only lost to Keiser 6-0 both times that they played them. And then I think that the Ottawa game will be a little bit more challenging than the Georgia Invitational that occurred, just because I think that Ottawa was saving some of their best for last in this tournament. So, all of that being said, Thomas, floor of still making the A bracket and winning a game. So, a floor of a second round exit, honestly, and a ceiling of a national tournament. The expectations are very, very high with the Nighthawks, as they have been the past few years, and it's for good reason. There's a reason that they've made the national tournament and the national championship, and there's a reason that they are favored to do so again.
All right, and that'll be it. Kodey and Gino, thank you so much. Once again, they will be in Georgia next week for the majority of those games. Unfortunately, I cannot go. Hopefully one day I can, but for now, make sure you show them some love next week when you see them and whatnot. It should be a good time. But, we have one more episode later this week. This episode should have came out today, as in May 1st, Wednesday. But we have another episode on May 3rd. Make sure you check that one out. It is our award show where we highlight some of the best flag football players in the entire country, talking about all sorts of different awards. Myself, Kodey, Gino, we all have votes. And then we have our friend Corey at NAIA F-Ball and our bud here, Nate Williams, one of our flag football insiders who will be voting for the first time, as well as you, the fans. You, the fans, voted on Twitter/X, which is, by the way, at Playmakers Corner. Give us a follow there, and has made your voice known. And so we'll combine all those votes, and the player who gets the most votes wins, or, the tiebreaker is the fan vote. And, just from somebody who's going to be on that episode, there's going to be some interesting twists and turns. So make sure you tune in there. But until then, we will catch you next time.